Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Covington City Council Joint Study Session with our awesome Human Services Commission. In compliance with state law, City Council special and regular meetings are being held in a hybrid format with in-person, telephonic, and virtual options for public viewing and participation. With that, we'll call this meeting for December 10th to order. And we'll just go around the room and introduce ourselves. I'm going to start with Monty on the online.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Moni. I'm one of the commission members, and I couldn't be there in person because I have two children and I locked them. If you see them, just ignore. Thank you very much.
Thanks for being here. And then Michaela.
Hi, Michaela Romero. New to the commission. Thank you guys for having me here. I too have a son, but I was able to get away for the night to be here in person. Thank you all for having me.
Joe Smomo, Council.
Beth Porter, City Council.
Christina Soltis, City Council.
Catherine Williams, Human Services Commission. Thank you for having us.
Sean Smith, I'm on the council.
Jeff Wagner, your mayor.
Sarah Parker, Vice Chair of the Commission.
Jennifer Harger-Helson, City Council. Debbie Hartsock, City Council.
Aaron Patterson, Community Care Specialist.
Johnston, Human Services.
Regan Bully, City Manager.
Krista Bates, City Clerk, Executive Assistant. I just want to make a point. I think one of the panelists actually might be a commissioner. It's a new commissioner, and I don't know. I'm just, you don't see her. Okay, she said she was joining virtually, so. All right, I just want to make sure.
All right. Thank you all for being here tonight. I look forward to hearing from our Human Services Commission. And I'm going to turn it over to Sarah. Sarah, you taking it over, or Julie, or?
The Sarah show.
Okay.
All right, first I want to thank you for having us again this year. It's always great to check in with council and have this discussion. We sort of have a very basic agenda for today. Looking back at this last year, looking forward at next year, and then an update from Darren about the community care program, which has really been taking up a lot of steam and showing some amazing results. So to begin right away, let's look back at our goals and what we accomplished for 2024. Sorry, reverse that. We're going to introduce what our plan is for next year. As we noted, we have two new commission members. So the beginning of our year will actually be part of that onboard process and welcoming them. Thank you for joining us as your first commission meeting with us. Looking forward to getting to know you better. So those initial couple meetings will be getting them up to speed, what our priorities are, what our typical agendas look like, what our grant years look like, what our off years look like. Next year is an off year, so we tend to focus heavily on site visits, which is checking in on the agencies which we have funded. We tend to break that into maintaining relationships with our long-term partners, but also meeting new partners and seeing where they are. We want to be able to keep tabs on these new agencies that could be long-term commitments, but also watching for red flags in case these are not good agencies to continue recommending going forward. We want to make sure our budget dollars are allocated as best as possible. But again, the maintenance of ongoing relationships is really important to continue providing care to our community. One of the other priorities that we have as we continue looking forward into making sure our community knows about the services that are available is reviewing the communication materials. What are our public-facing outlets for information? This is online, physical brochures. Where's the information posted? What languages is it in? Are our community members able to access the information about where and how to get services? And this is an area we would love to collaborate more with other commissions and the council to get feedback on what is working, what isn't working, and how do we make our information available. Because it does very little good to have services if no one knows about it.
So the resource bank possibly.
Correct. The other thing that we tend to do is we do have a small budget to do an outreach event. It tends to be in years that we do not do grant reviews because it is a significant amount of staff and commission time to put on and hold. In the past, we've done it at Polaris, which is a large community that tends to be needing a lot of our services, but the potential for reaching out to senior centers or other more at-risk community members so that we spread the awareness of what we do and what people can access. That being said, this last year, we did a grant review. And this is a huge lift. It begins early in the year and it goes all year. And as you just known, you just approved the budget. And thank you very much for your support and your trust and the evaluations that we dedicate a lot of time and effort to discussing and understanding and trying to make the wisest choice possible to allocate very limited resources. Every time there's a grant cycle, the number of applications increases and the overall requests for dollars increases. This year we had 48 applications asking for a total of $810,000. Our current human resources budget allocation is $136,000. So that being said, there were some very, very difficult cuts we had to make. And I know you guys talked through this at the previous meeting. And again, we thank you for your support and understanding our judgment calls when there are some very difficult choices to make. It's one thing that we always want to consider is the review of the total city's resources and are they properly allocated across all of the needs. And there's never going to be enough money for everything, but it's not always the same amount of money needing to go to the same places every time. So we, again, thank you so much. Generally, when we do our funding allocations, we have the 5 funding priorities based upon our the master plan. Basic needs, economic independence, education for all, health and safety, and diversity inclusion. One of the first things we look for is agencies that are capable of meeting multiple of those priorities. That tends to be a exponential use and outcomes achievement for the dollar spent. That being said, there are certain agencies that are hyper efficient and excellent targeting one specific need. Meals on Wheels for Seniors comes to mind for this one. They use a very small budget to do amazing things, but they don't do expansive services. So we're not going to ignore a good agency just because it only meets one need. But we also want to make sure that every need is being considered. And so Julie has put together sort of a resource allocation. This is on the handout. The first page is sort of a big picture overview of the application that came in, the budget allocations, which agencies we funded and for how much. The second page has a breakdown of programs that specifically support the Community Care Navigator, which are integral to the success of this program. And then sources of funding that are in addition to the human services budget. And that's sort of the total allocation into the different categories. A little bit more broad than the 5 priority areas, but sort of subcategories within those. And you can see that we focused a lot of resources into housing. This is one of the outcomes from the human services survey we had done with all of the focus groups. It was a resounding cry that basic needs for housing security is a critical component of what our community needs. The other basic services for food security came up quite a bit, and then behavioral health. And this can be early learning, senior loneliness, mental health services, broadly speaking, but also recovery programs. Those were quite clear, some of the top needs. And so there is a larger allocation of our resources to meet those areas. But we also don't want to ignore other needs that they haven't disappeared. We've noted that all of these needs have increased over the years. Some of them at an exponential rate, like housing and food, just because of economic pinch points of a broad array, and especially since the COVID crisis. I'll take a brief pause if anyone has any questions. Yes.
So first, I commend you on all of this because cutting $674,021 is a lot. When I was just trying to cut 100,000, I had 6 people yelling at me for the cuts I was trying to make. So how you all are able to do that, I might want to give us some clues. But the next question is, what did each one of them ask for? I know it's cutting 810,000 is a lot to ask for. And knowing that that won't happen, but like what were the original asks? Because one of those, because it's not on this document. So what
we
is?
do have that information. Again, it's not here, but we do have the spreadsheet for what it was asked. We also keep track of what was asked in previous years. And that would be a little bit harder to collect into a single document, but we do look at those increased needs, but also performance over time to see what is a reasonable amount to fund. One of the first things we like to do is make sure that the amount we are funding is worth the administrative cost. We do not want to fund anyone less than $1,000. I would say a lot of the asks tend to be in the $2,000 to $5,000 range. These tend to be our smaller, more local regional organizations. But since I joined in 2020, I would say that bracket of the low ask has crept up from the $2,000 to $5,000 to more the $5,000 to $10,000 range. The needs, even at the smaller organizations, are just greater. And then some of the larger capacity but greater service providers, they consistently ask for 15 to 20. There's always a few at the very high end, 40, 50, 60, 70. I think that's a combination of need, but also they know they're not going to get what they ask for, so they cast the net quite high. But there's different strategies for grant writing, and not every agency takes the same track. So that being said, it's a balance of how do we give as many organizations enough to make a difference and make sure it's worth the administrative cost on our side and on their side, and fund as many as possible. So a few of our highest performing, highest need agencies, even if they ask for a lot, we tend to try and allocate them most, if not all, of what they need up front, and then see how far the rest of the money goes. If it doesn't go far enough, maybe we take a little bit away from them, but not so much that we lose a critical partner and we reduce their capacity to perform. So it is a number of strategies that tries to fund as many organizations as possible with as much of a grant to each one as possible. I hope that helps clarify.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thanks, Sarah. Can you tell us on the diversity and inclusion, which programs fall under that category? Because I'm not familiar with all of these.
So I can kind of, so there's a few agencies that, there's a few agencies that probably could have gone into this bucket as well. I just picked kind of their the forte or the focus of the agency, but like Living Well Kent, that's an agency that kind of focuses on diversity, but also provides food.
Okay.
And then I also threw in Lutheran Community Services Northwest because they kind of deal with refugees and asylum seekers and people that are trying to come to this country. And so those, and then Open Doors for Multicultural Families obviously would be one.
Okay, great.
But yeah.
Thank you.
The other aspect we're looking for is that all of our agencies are at least cognizant of the needs of different communities. If they serve a wide spread of a population, we want to make sure, are there translation services available if needed? Do they have different people from different backgrounds on their staff? some of this information is more available than not, but a lot of the applications are responsive to how do you incorporate diversity goals, or at least not ignore them.
Thank you.
Mhm. So if there aren't any further questions on the specific funding goals, how it was allocated, or budget decision-making processes, one of the things that Julie was going to talk about is sort of a service unit 101. How is the data collected? What do service units mean? And what are these quarterly reports and performance ratings?
Yeah, so I won't bore you with all the 35 reimbursement invoices that go through every quarter, but just a high level, the service unit is, if you go to the second page of the document, it's basically a measurable goal that I set for agencies, or the agency works with me in setting. It's a contracted unit of and a measurement of their service, and it results, excuse me, in a number that is quantifiable for funding. So all service units reflect the service unit a Covington resident specifically will receive in accordance with what the agency is providing. For example, the case management hours is a measurable unit for Kent Youth and Behavioral Health. Shelter beds, Dawn, pounds of food, storehouse, training sessions, I'm sorry, that's a typo. It's now Washington Poison Center. Miles driven, sound generations. And then how are they decided? So in the next couple months, I will meet with all 25 agencies and go through and kind of negotiate what they're able to offer for the dollar amount that we're granting them. And we'll kind of work through, and it'll be just kind of this kind of back and forth a bit, and we'll settle on a number, and then I hold them accountable for that number throughout the year. And if they don't meet that number, then I can reclaim funds or withhold funds. And that's all I have to say. Any questions about service units, or without going too much into the weeds? Oh, I didn't see you on page.
So I don't see Washington Poison Center on here. Is it maybe from a previous?
Yeah, I'm
year?
sorry.
So
That was
just
just an example.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
There's other agencies like Communities and Schools does mentoring hours, you know.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's a unit that's unique to what they provide.
Correct.
Get it? Okay,
Yeah.
thanks.
And then just like a follow-up question on the units. Do we look specifically for units in that serve Covington residents only, or is it in general? And as long as there's a certain percentage of them that are helping Covington residents, how does that?
I mean, I set up the contract so that it's based on Covington residents specifically.
Okay, perfect. Yeah.
If they're not meeting Covington residents, I hate to say I'm not interested, but
No,
I
fine.
you know, I kind of have to steward the dollars and make sure they're going in the right direction.
I
So, yeah.
appreciate that.
Yeah.
Mhm.
For a little bit additional context, when we review the grant applications, all of their units that apply to the sort of joint application, we can see what they're asking for, what they've been given, what their service units are overall for all of those jurisdictions, but Covington is also broken out. So we can also see where their general service area is. Are they likely to be able to reach Covington residents in the future? Maybe we do want to fund them more to bring them here. But if they're very centric to somewhere else and every once in a while, there's maybe a Covington resident, that's also quite relevant information.
Good point.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Question. How do you determine these service units, and Sarah, I'll clarify, I don't mean the actual number.
Mhm.
How do you determine, training sessions or miles driven is the right?
Yeah.
measure? And is there a best management practice for that?
That's a good question.
And
I've
if not,
asked
are we
that too.
developing it? Yeah.
And ever since I've worked here, I've questioned whether service units is the best way to do it or not. They're developed from a universal application that goes through a software system called the Share One app portal. All the agencies that buy into this in the South King City have the applications go through that process, and they're kind of universalized, and they even when they apply for funding from us, that they kind of denote which service units they're asking for a grant for. So it's very like kind of robotic and very like universal and consistent among all the South King cities. I don't know if it's the best way. That's another conversation maybe for another day. We have the AHA contract and the RNP contract that are set up a little differently, you know, so I don't know. It's something
Does
to talk
that-
about.
Does that thing like for dawn shelter beds though, does that, if they're getting, we hit that number, but that also represents other services too within it, or is it just,
Just the
Shelter
shelter
beds.
beds.
so we don't see that they'd get counseling or, you know, harm reduction or anything like that with those shelter beds too?
Well, I'm assuming hopefully they're provided that within the
Right.
shelter, but we're not contracting out
yeah.
specifically for it. Yeah.
Although certain agencies that provide multiple services, they will have multiple service
Units.
unit types.
Yeah.
So it's quite common that an agency will have 2 or 3. Here's our service units for this category, and this category. So we talk about shelters. It's quite common if they have beds, do they provide case management or behavioral health services? Some of these larger agencies have the scope to do more than one thing. Some of the smaller agencies just focus on one key service area.
Another question, and I don't know if this is the right timing for this, but I think since we're talking about service units and performance, we noticed on the list that you brought to us for 2025 funding, a few agencies were missing from the 2024 list, and we asked, why are we not renewing or funding them again? And I recall that you said there were a number that weren't either meeting our needs or their performance was not per expectation. So was that then a case of if they signed up for so many beds for dawn or whatever their measurement was, is that what the trigger was to say we wouldn't fund them again this year, or would it have been a number of things happening?
No, I think it would be a number of things. So for an agency not to be funded, yes, I mean, we do look at service units and we say, how are they doing? Have they met their goals? But we also look at the impact, like how are they serving the city of Covington in such as, like, if we're looking at the safe car parking, for example, like Darren unfortunately isn't able to get clients in there and it's repeatedly full. So, yeah, so, or for Vine Maple Place, that was a tough one, but they were receiving HB 1406 funds and we only had so much to work with. So that was kind of how that was decided. They are always over the mark with their service units. It's nothing against their service units at all.
Okay. Yeah, and I remembered about safe car parking. That was specifically around not having spaces available when we need them. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I would say one of the ongoing goals since I've joined in 2020 of the commission is to sort of first look at the quantitative data, service units, what are quantifiable data is really important. It's really easy to track and monitor, but it's also really important to be able to have a holistic decision-making process. And so we're continually reanalyzing, are we making decisions in the best way possible? And so we never are disregarding the quantitative data, but we need the full picture, which is also where site visits and ongoing communication with our partners comes in really, really strongly to inform the decisions that we recommend.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
Okay, so lastly, I'm going to want to turn the floor over to Darren, who will talk about the community care program. One of the great things that the Human Services Commission has gotten to do is partner with him and see how the program's been going, make sure that the funding and resources are there and develop partnerships that are really helping him complete the work and enhance our ability to serve Covington residents. And so I really hope that this partnership continues and the program continues to flourish and we help as many people as possible. So Darren, off to you.
So,
That's pretty good.
what I have here is just kind of just the hard figures for the year of the amount of folks that I've served in terms of care coordination service. These are all, the figures reflect a positive service, meaning those that I contacted and agreed to engage in service and also signed the necessary paperwork to begin the care coordination process. There's a lot of folks that I contact that just aren't willing for whatever reason to be amenable to that. I would put that true number at about 120 services or so. Working with the Gelada software provider to find a way to track that true number, but the amount of folks I did have contact with was about 96. And I kind of determined defining service success as stabilization. About 63 of those, we were able to successfully achieve stabilization and help them accomplish their goals. One of the things that we do when we get started with these folks is try to set up goals right at the outset. Like, hey, what is your personal individual goal? Some of those could be translate back to a program referral or a certain milestone, or maybe they need direct aid or some kind of direct service. But we were able to largely achieve the majority of the goals that we established with them. By category, the most predominant was housing. And second to that was clothing, food, and basic needs. Those tended to be around the direct aid. A lot of folks I contact were in need of that, sleeping in their cars and in need of food, telling me like, hey, I don't have any money to get through to the end of the month. And so it comes down to sending them over to the storehouse. But in the interim, the direct aid has been really, really strong to give them something to be able to be solvent through until they're able to get into the distribution times throughout the week. And so that's been really helpful for that. And also it's helpful when it comes to rapport building and building trust and kind of just helping them confront a lot of that trauma and trust us that we're trying to help them work with them. The last page and a half is just a complete breakdown of the different types of goals that I work with them. This is kind of a model that I foresee over the course of the next year becoming a little bit more clinical as we start working more and more with AHA to try to develop a co-occurring rehabilitation program that helps get folks from the street into their program, and working alongside the recovery navigators who are basically there to help them navigate between each one of these different criteria and needs that they have and kind of connect the dots, because a lot of these people, it isn't just one goal or need that they have. So they've been really helpful. And so I just anticipate over the next year, a lot of these becoming more clinical as we build out the model.
Yeah, this is great. Thank you. Do you have the opportunity or does the opportunity present itself, I guess, for cities to cross-pollinate and share information about maybe not best practices, but practices that you're seeing working in your local community so that you can learn from each other? Also, I'm kind of curious if they're collecting this type of data as well.
Couldn't speak to whether they're collecting data. I do know that a lot of the folks that I've contacted aren't necessarily mutually exclusive to Covington. Maple Valley, they're kind of people that are known, in the South King County area. And so there's been a couple instances where we've helped and assisted folks that were maybe at one point in time contacting Maple Valley, maybe trespassed or vice versa, and they kind of end up there. And so there's been some kind of collaboration between agencies to try to just help them kind of meet their needs.
Okay. Thank you.
Go ahead. So one of the things I'm noticing is quite a lot of these goals, there's not as many people needing it, but they're almost all fully met. But the big gaps are in housing. Can you explain a little bit more about why the housing goals are not met? I know just housing access is a big problem, but for our local community, does anything stand out?
Yeah, for a lot of people, I see a lot of people with a lot of animals that they don't want to surrender, and there's a lot of conditionals. That sounds like it wouldn't be that significant, but it's a lot of people that have animals they don't want to surrender that, or there's other conditionals. I had a couple that regularly goes up to Harborview for dialysis, and it's like, hey, I only want to stay up in like Seattle area, and so it's kind of like when there's housing available, there's housing available in this context, and sometimes to some people, that's not working for me, so they end up turning it down, and so we just try to stabilize them best we can and get them into a shelter.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. I'm simply curious, on the goal category, we notice that transportation is really high up there, third one down. But when we look at what we fund, transportation is only 1%. If they don't correlate, and if I'm saying this totally wrong, that correct me, but why, I guess, why? If we want to see something that's really prevalent and a high goal taken care of, is that something we should be investing more time, effort, attention to? Maybe there was a good option. I'm just curious. I'm not criticizing.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
The figure largely reflects the folks I'm contacting who are living in their car.
Yeah.
And there's been instances where they're literally out of gas. And so,
Consider that transportation.
yes, so.
Also, with the applicants that applied for grants, very few were transportation oriented.
Yeah, I mean,
So
That's an ongoing concern for many rural areas, that there just are no available transportation
Right.
options. And so the development of those takes a huge amount of capital and labor, which hasn't,
I drove through.
yeah. And it's usually a wider regional issue rather than a small city issue. So
I drove through Newcastle today, and it was like, there was probably 60 people at one bus stop, and it wasn't just one bus stop, and I was like, they're confident that a bus is coming, and it just kind of pointed
Well,
out.
they have no choice.
No, but that's not the point. The point is there's a bus coming
Hopefully.
versus
They're pretty.
smaller cities like us, and you can stand there and you can wait, and I just wish, it's perspective, but it was like, I wish we had more attention.
Oh, I was just gonna comment on transportation if you want to get me rolling on the rails, so speaking about transportation, it is a big thing because you were saying that there are people who need to go up to Harborview regularly, but they're down here and there's no buses that are gonna get them there on a regular issue. King County has a scale of how they determine this. The determination for their equity priority area is defined as an area with a high proportion of priority populations as defined in the mobility this is from King County, which includes measures of communities of color, low or no income populations, disabled populations, foreign-born populations, and populations with limited English proficiency. For us to get anywhere near getting anything, we need to have more census, EPA census areas of 4 and 5. And we do not have anything regarding a 5. So in essence, King County is saying we're not worthy of their stuff because our homeless population or those needing help it's not high enough for them to even care about. I take that as offensive. You guys can take that however you want to, but if we want transportation to help these people out, we need to be making a stink with King County. And
Or come up with another solution, such as King County Metro does offer this. It's not their shuttle program, but they'll provide a van if there is just someone that will drive it. And we don't, like, we rolled that out to the community and no one has really latched onto it. But if there were volunteers in the community that wanted to sign up for a day a week and there was a dedicated van, there could be that transportation, and maybe it's not gonna go to Seattle, but and I'm not a proponent for the city taking that on, but I think there's still room for us to communicate that in some way. There just wasn't a lot when.
No.
This is one of
It goes to,
the-
like, marketing, human services
It does.
to our faith-based organizations, to our community organizations that form volunteer groups to do this stuff. Like, how do we, I brought this up at another meeting, how do we let people know what our community needs? So people want them to step up.
That's why one of the goals that Julie brought up and raised for next year is evaluating how do people learn about our services? Is that information available? And I think rebounding on that, once we know how to communicate and galvanize public awareness, there is more of a platform to build on that to provide more services. This is one area that actually the really rural areas tend to thrive in because they've been so cut off for so long. You know, it's not going to be a transit bus from here to Seattle, that little circular, you know, a shuttle that gets you from a common area to the major shopping areas or places of public health or a transit center. You know, those little neighborhood or small city loops. You see this a lot out in the peninsula or in mountain communities that just King County Metro was never going to get there because it's not King County for one, but the resources are not there. And so things that are more community centric but smaller scale, we don't necessarily have to reinvent the wheel, but we do need to have a committed community, government, and platform to communicate and support these. And so it tends to be a development over time because that is labor intensive, even if we can find it volunteer service based. Yes.
Yeah, and it'd also be interesting to see, like, if somebody were to, if we were to market that, like, what is underlying? Is it taking somebody to dialysis once a week? What time? Like, is there a way to coordinate routes so that somebody could service multiple people? I mean, I don't know if we know that for sure, like what. She can't fill a mute if you don't know what you're for, but I think that it's.
Hi, Aaron, I have a question on, sir. So on the front here, you have care seekers non-compliant. What are next steps for them? Since they don't want to comply.
That could range from reporting it out to the sheriff's department or reaching out to working with the business to take next step, you know, because that in many cases that it's somebody not wanting to leave while setting up an encampment inside of a vehicle and just not accepting services. And so, you know, just kind of staffing it with the sheriff's department, bringing them on board and letting them take whatever next steps looks like from there.
Running cable to somebody's house, steal electricity and water, things like that. So that's the next steps is sheriff.
That's one of them, or it could be also referring to another agency that maybe is better approached. There's been instances where, you know, people know who these people are, and other agencies had an experience with them and maybe they have a better rapport. So, you know, sometimes that's the approach I take if they know they have a better situation.
I was just gonna say, I think you've been out there like with those individuals repeated times too. It's not like you've tried once or twice, like you've gone multiple times.
No, I understand you.
But yeah,
Just one and done. But it
Yeah.
comes to a point where
yeah, I see what you're saying.
if they're just continuing and then the situation continues to grow and then now you've got multiple encampments, tents and stuff
Yeah,
piled up, that's now become a health and safety hazard as well.
yeah, and we meet regularly with the detective and the chief and talk about these issues and try to kind of mitigate it. So there's open communication lines too.
Thank you.
I had something. Oh, I had something earlier, I've been holding off, but, so going back to the transportation thing, with 1%, this is still representative of all the people that you helped. So with 1% of the funding, 27 of your 28 cases were still met. The goal was met with them.
This is
Yeah.
reflective of the discretionary budget, so I don't think it's included.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, so I was just looking at the transportation here, seeing that the Met goals was 27 out of 28, and so I was looking at the funding that she mentioned.
That's your, this reflects your work,
Right.
not
Yeah.
the funding that we're giving.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, thank
So,
you.
Sean.
yeah, I might have to write some of this down and send it later. That was interesting about the animal. I'd be curious to see if there are other unknown barriers. I mean, obviously they're unknown, but some of those hidden things that are preventing people from taking steps. And something like animals, public's often far more willing to support and help animals. But so if we can show that we've got human beings out there that have a barrier to these resources because of their pet, there may be other ways to support them that support the animal and the person. So I'd just be curious if there's other areas of intersection like that we can, leverage, but I'd be curious. And I was gonna ask if there are any animal support groups that we're thinking about supporting. So, the other thing I really like the strategic thinking about for next year, reporting and communicating this. I think last year, it's been that long that we talked about not only multiple platforms, but multiple locations for these. I mean, obviously we want to have information on our website, but not everyone has, even in this day and age, access to the internet. So I really think we should look to see this in our chamber about partnering some of our bigger businesses and about putting bulletin boards in their parking lots. I mean, I would pitch it as a way, you see this as an issue, I'm sure these businesses do. So let's work on your issue and our issue and, give us a little space in your parking lot for these community resource boards. I like the resource event idea too, but I thought when we first said it, I thought it was the resource van. And that got me wondering, for some of these, I know we're gonna have a mental health van that's coming to town, if there aren't ways, maybe even to use the youth council's van at times to cross-brand it to say, when this shows up, this, maybe a pop-up resource event, and we've got potential resources to help you, or we can answer questions on that. So, and then finally, this one I might follow up on, this information gets reported to us. Is there anyone else that we report this information to? The county, the feds? I mean, obviously probably not required to, but what I'm getting at is, how do we leverage this? Like you said, with the buses, saying, look, this, just because we don't meet this demographic or this particular metric, this is what we're doing, and this shows you a broader picture of the need in Covington. So, this next year, I think we should think about how and who we should be getting this information in front of so that we can, it's good work and we're doing things and we're showing success. How do we leverage that? So I don't have all the answers, but I'll start keep thinking this year about those things.
We met with King County Public Health
Yeah.
and shared a lot of our experiences and what we've been seeing with them. And I felt like it was really productive conversation.
I would, and just as you said it, I would, read this maybe I'll talk to our lawmakers as well, state and federal, the more, and they might say, well, kind of like what we did with the lawsuit. They referenced Covington in the lawsuit that won today. You could always have a lawmaker go, man, I remember talking to Covington, they got all this great data. This bill could be, anyway, I just constantly communicating with the public, even if you don't think it's landing, we've got to keep putting this stuff out there. So sorry to cut you off.
Christina.
Is this some,
Finally.
is this something we can do when we climb the hill? I'm just saying, throw it out there, we're before then, we have eyes. just something to mention, be like, hey, is there a plan to collect data? Questions are how you point across, in my opinion, gently. You know, is there a plan in place for how we collect data that each city is really working and struggling with? My question is for you, Darren. Do you ever, so for medical procedures, when I was working in the hospital, I actually worked directly with dialysis patients. Often, very often, Hope would bring them, or another transportation service, but they're isolated specifically for the medical transportation. Do you know about that? Is it something that's an issue? Would you work with them if it is?
Getting them to and from like their treatment.
Correct. Do you find that there are any people that have trouble with that?
I haven't seen that,
So
but
they just get them to Harvard, for example.
yeah, I know the recovery navigators, they have and will take people where they need to go. So they're fantastic with that. There's a gentleman, you know, who's in a wheelchair. They went through the entire motions. They figured it out. So they're very helpful with that.
And then my second question, and this is just roughly, the percentage of people that either don't cooperate or refuse help, do you find, or I should say, what percent of those people do you find are either current or under substance abuse, or
Yeah.
how many of those are affected by that?
So my figures were about, like, I think it was 23 recently that I reported out of the 96 individuals that I met, but I suspected that they're much higher, but because of the nature of how these interactions are on the side of the road, it takes a lot of rapport building to kind of help people divulge that.
So what I mean is, the ones that don't want help, are most of them under influence, or are a bigger majority not, and just simply rationally, soberly say no?
My intuition says, and professional
Right.
experience, more often than not, that's the case. Yeah.
Okay.
So,
Thank you.
But I mean, then how would you know how many have a correlating mental health issue?
Well, no, for sure, but you can often tell if somebody's under like influence or under something. Not duress, but actual chemical influence. So that's what I mean, like how many are just saying no because they're there or not there? Just curious to build some kind of quantifiable data.
Well, just a comment on that. From my experience and my limited experience, a lot of people will deny going to a shelter because they can't use there. So whether they are,
Yeah.
will be, have been, but it does seem to be a deterrent. I had a thought about one of the ways and places we could get information out is our churches. And I know Julie remembers back in the old days when we used to have a group of church secretaries and we'd get together and everybody knew what was taking place and who could help with what. Or we've moved way beyond that, but I really feel like our churches, you know, they're in it for the good of the community. And I think that they would love to know what we're doing as a city, what Darren's doing, but also what the needs are out there. And it's good for them to know who to refer them to, like Human Services, because they are not equipped anymore. It used to be that the church secretary would have a bag of food, you know, that she could hand out. And, you know, in some cases that might still happen, but they're not the mental counselors anymore. And they just don't, you know, churches have just gotten away from that. So if there's anything I can do to help facilitate getting you guys in the door of some of the local pastors, I don't know all of them really well, but I know some of them pretty well. But I think that they would want to know what's happening, where the needs are, and who to come to.
I do remember that group. It was very effective, actually, because it was a kind of partnership of local people that cared really and came together, and it was very effective. So yeah, I mean, just having that information would be great.
I think there's a lot of potential for accessing any group that can talk to a large number of people at once, even, churches tend to be one that people think of first and foremost, but as Covington grows, a lot of it is in neighborhoods. Every HOA sends out at least an annual, here's the update, but most of them have bi-monthly or semi-annually just information blasts or a neighborhood website. If we can reach out to people who are in charge of those Nextdoor or Facebook, HOA, secretaries, just at least every year. Here's what's going on in our community and here's services that are available. But also we're a small city and a lot of our needs are being served by regional organizations, and our people are moving to and from. So why don't we have our information at the Maple Valley Community Center or the Kent Community Centers, have shared resources for cities that are using shared organizations that cover this region. And I think the broader net we spread, the more the information is accessible. And where there are relationships already in existence, which is where faith-based communities exist, there's a rapport. If you get information from someone or an organization you already trust, you're more likely to use it. So a bulletin board is great. You start seeing it around, but the more people are talking about it, the more likely that information is going to come from a trusted source. So I think it will be a combination of strategies that is most effective rather than going, this is the one thing that we're going to do. But again, the data reporting, it's both, we collect it for our own needs, which is fantastic. Being able to report it up the governmental chain is great. If we need to make funding allocations from King County, from Washington State, or even federal resources, we have the data to support those requests. But also it's critical to support our partners. There's no reason why we can't have our, city Facebook page going, hey, every month, let's highlight one of our human services. We do our site visits, and quite commonly we get here's what we did last year, and they'll talk about success stories, the numbers they met, how the tax dollars were spent, where the grant money went. And so these snapshots tend to already exist. And so it wouldn't be a huge lift to then compile it in a way that our city can then spread the awareness. It's also a way to be responsive to our citizens. It's your tax dollars at work. Here's where it's going. If you let us know what your needs are, here's how we're meeting them. If you see that there's a gap, let us know, because we want to be responsive. If we don't know what you need, we can't respond. And so there's this continual back and forth of getting the information spread about needs and what is being done. All right, we've got just shy of 10 minutes left. Any final wrap-up questions, comments?
Thank you to you and your entire team on the Human Services Commission. I don't envy you what happened to narrow it down to the few that can be chosen, selected for funding, but I do appreciate all the hard work that you do and all the expertise and thinking that you put into it.
We appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. And Darren, Julie, thank you both very much also for all that you do. It just makes Covington that much better with all of you. And Monty, Ann, and Darius, thank you for being online and joining us as well. Appreciate that.
Thank you. Really happy to be on this commission, by the way. So thank you for having me.
Well, thank you. I guess with that, if there's no further comments, just thank you again, and hope you have a very happy holidays.
And the Human Services Commission would like to, as always, extend our thanks to Julie for the fabulous job she does making all of our work possible. And
Thank you.
Darren, it's been wonderful working with you as a partner in the city.
Yeah,
That's right.
All right.
the feeling is mutual. Thank you guys. I mean, this was a great conversation, great ideas. I mean, it's not a silo, this work. So I just appreciate your suggestions and thank you for having this conversation.
With that, this study session is over and we will start our meeting at 7 p.m. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.